Modern life occasionally throws a problem at us so massive it feels completely paralyzing. We're talking about global pandemics, sudden economic crashes, or massive social upheavals that hit entire populations all at once. When a society is healthy and functioning properly, the first reaction to a crisis is logical. People ask, what is causing this problem? But extreme collective fear changes how the brain operates. The complex neural pathways required for rational problem-solving shut down. The brain abandons the what and frantically searches for a who to blame. This neurological short circuit is what we define as scapegoating. It isn't a modern political strategy. It is a hardwired, three-step psychological shortcut. For centuries, our brains have leaned on this exact same pattern to navigate overwhelming terror. The first necessary ingredient for this shortcut to trigger is a massive crisis that generates inescapable collective panic. Look at 16th and 17th century Europe. Populations were simultaneously crushed by waves of disease, severe famine, and violent religious conflict. These problems were complex and largely invisible. You can't punch a famine, and you can't arrest a plague. Because these threats lacked clear boundaries and were difficult to fix, they pushed the human brain to its absolute limits of anxiety. The explosion of witch trials that followed happened because whole communities were desperate for an easy, physical target. Punishing a supposed witch offered a tangible way to alleviate their terror of the unknown. That brings us to the second ingredient, a highly visible group that can absorb all of that societal fear. Fast forward to America in the 1950s. The Cold War generated very real, highly complex geopolitical fears regarding Soviet influence and the threat of nuclear annihilation. Senator Joseph McCarthy stepped into this environment and offered a solution. He gave the public a way to take a massive, invisible global threat and project it onto targets right in their own neighborhoods. This photograph captures how McCarthy built a narrative of a widespread domestic conspiracy, pointing to specific states based on completely unproven accusations. By treating this flimsy map as definitive proof, society found relief. They didn't have to understand the nuances of the Cold War anymore. They just had to look for local enemies, like their neighbors, teachers, and coworkers. This shift from global strategy to intense local paranoia had a severe human cost. Thousands of people had their reputations destroyed and their careers ruined across the country based on little more than a pointed finger. The human brain prefers to destroy a visible, accessible group rather than endure the prolonged anxiety of fighting an invisible, complex threat. The final ingredient to activate this shortcut is a simple story, a narrative that neatly explains everything going wrong. We see this exact dynamic playing out today. Think about our recent economic crises, a global pandemic, and the periods of rapid social change we are living through right now. When a charismatic voice aggressively reduces a dense web of global issues down to a single enemy, the brain finds relief in the sudden reduction. The chaos of 100 factors is replaced by one manageable target. The targets of these simple stories follow a predictable rotation: immigrants, religious minorities, and political opponents. The simple story carries a seductive false promise. It tricks society into believing that if we can just remove this one specific group, the entire complex crisis will magically vanish. Centuries pass. The clothing changes, the technology evolves, and the specific targets rotate, but the psychological shortcut remains identical. And this reveals the hidden danger of scapegoating. Yes, innocent people are deeply harmed, but there is a secondary tragedy. The actual root cause of the crisis goes completely ignored. Because society becomes entirely consumed by the hunt for an enemy, the hard, necessary work of fixing the original complex problem is abandoned. The disease spreads, the economy stagnates, the real threat remains. Because the shortcut is a reflex, recognizing it requires an active choice. When a new crisis hits and a simple story begins to circulate, we have to recognize that the story is designed to stop us from looking at the facts. In that moment, the narrative of blame isn't an answer, it's a distraction. To break this cycle, we have to pause. By recognizing the historical pattern of fear for what it is, we can move past the impulse to blame and begin the actual work of solving the problem. We must decode the psychology behind the blame.